Rife of the SDP, and the next speaker on his feet, former Director of the Bank of England and Under-Secretary of State for Economic Affairs, Eric Roll. Lord Roll, independent speaker.
On an occasion which is clearly far from free of contention, he has managed very skillfully to preserve the tradition of an uncontroversial maiden speech, but without loss of substance or eloquence. I'm sure we look forward to many more. Whatever view, my lords, we may take of the causes of our present discontents or of the appropriate remedies, I'm sure we can all unite in thanking the noble Lord, the Lord Beswick, for having given us the occasion so early in the new year to debate matters of grave concern, not only for our economic prosperity, but for the social health of our society. I cannot but agree that the signs of division are too clear to be ignored. Division economically between employed and unemployed, division regionally between the relatively prosperous South and the depressed North, and the inevitable consequences in the social sphere, which are much more difficult to identify and to quantify, but which in the long run are surely just as evil, if not more so. There's another division which has not yet been referred to, and that is division within families. There's enough prima facie evidence in recent research that this is yet another consequence of persistent unemployment. As the noble Earl, the Earl of Stockton, has said, the progress of social security in the last 40 years has enabled us to escape the worst physical manifestations of the last great era of unemployment, the 30s. We have not had hunger marches descending on London, but I fear that the social and psychological consequences, including the division within families to which I've referred, reproduce some of the uglier features of the 30s, and I fear they will leave scars for many years to come. My lords, I do not want to dilate on this aspect of the motion because I'm sure many more noble lords will wish to speak on it. I want rather to say something about the second half of the motion, namely about the economic policy to which the present situation points. Here, let me say at once that I have no intention to engage in controversy about this or that act of the government or this or that omission of action on the part of the government, or indeed about the dramatic events of the last week or two. I have long enough been reasonably close to the places at which decisions are taken to know, to be as aware as any noble lord can be, how difficult these matters are and how great are the pitfalls in economic policy. I want rather to say something on the basic approach to economic policy, for unless this is got right, it is very unlikely that specific measures will produce the desired result. I hope very much that in what I'm about to say on this point, I shall have the agreement of the noble Earl, the Earl of Stockton, under whom I had the honor to serve on a number of important occasions. And here I'm afraid I have to say, despite the warning of the noble Earl, the Earl Gowrie, that I do feel some considerable concern about the doctrinal rigidity which seems to have become fashionable. And this is in respect of an area of political action, the economic, where it seems to me to be particularly unsuitable. Economics, despite its long history and creditable achievements, is not the science, perhaps never will be, precise enough to provide a set of rigid prescriptions for specific action valid in all circumstances. We are told nowadays on very high authority that macroeconomic policy can do nothing about the level of economic activity and employment, that these can only be improved by microeconomic policies. Well, if microeconomic policies include training schemes, measures to improve the mobility of labor, both geographically and occupationally, of course, I welcome them most wholeheartedly. But to believe that these alone can cope with the massive unemployment problem of today is, I feel, surely fanciful. What is more important, to believe that macroeconomic policy, by which I suppose is meant fiscal and monetary policy, has nothing to do with the level of activity, with growth and employment, is not only to ignore the results of economic analysis, but it's to fly in the face of our own recent experience. Curiously, taxation seems now to be included in microeconomic policy, leading to the proposition that tax cuts, as preached by the so-called supply-siders in the United States, are endowed with a specially stimulating potency. Well, I'm not against tax cuts at appropriate times, but what is claimed for them is surely far from certain. Can it really be contended that the cuts in taxation in 79 and 80, which I hasten to say were entirely justified and indeed belated corrections of failures by previous administrations, have had such a stimulating effect on growth and employment that we now have 3.5 million unemployed? And what is more important, can it be contended that the other element of macroeconomic policy, namely a restrictive monetary policy relying primarily on interest rates, had nothing to do with the subsequent decline in the level of economic activity and employment? As I ventured to say, my lords, in a debate in your lordship's house as long as 4.5 years ago, the trouble with interest rates is that, so to speak, they hit the guilty and the innocent alike. Plans, projects, enterprises that appear perfectly rational and full of promise of profit at one level or expected level of interest rates turn very quickly uneconomic and invalid at a higher level. And what about the consequent appreciation of the currency brought about by an influx of foreign funds in search of higher yields? Do they not have disadvantageous consequences on our international competitiveness? In the same debate 4.5 years ago, I had just come back from Australia. I had to report to your lordships that one distributor of British motor cars told me that with an appreciation of sterling of 40%, effectively, it went even higher after that, he couldn't sell a single British car. We hear a great deal about wages and international competitiveness. Of course, wages are very important, but by no means the only element in unit labor cost. And of course, unit labor cost is a very important, though by no means the only element in international competitiveness. But what decline in unit labor cost and in wages would have been required to offset the blow to our international competitiveness by the appreciation of sterling in those years? My lords, enterprises abandoned through being made uneconomic by high interest rates are not easily revived, and foreign markets lost through a sudden appreciation of sterling are very difficult to regain. We are often told that we should look at the policy of the United States, particularly since in the last 2 years or so the American economy, as the noble Earl, the Earl of Stockton, has shown such substantial growth. Unemployment has declined somewhat, at any rate, and the inflation rate has also been brought down. But is it really certain that these results have been brought about only by the tax cuts of the Reagan administration? Or are they the result of the whole complex of a liberal, indeed all too liberal fiscal policy, both on the revenue and the expenditure side, combined with a monetary policy which is only restrictive enough to prevent the worst inflationary consequences without killing off the stimulating effect of the fiscal policy? And, as the noble Earl, the Earl of Stockton, told us in his memorable maiden speech, is not this whole policy, with its huge budget deficit, its huge deficit on the balance of payments on current account, sustained by an enormous influx of funds from all over the world, including from this country, and incidentally leading to the apparent paradox of a very strong currency? The other country to which we are often referred as an example is Japan, a country which I've visited very frequently in the last 27 years. Indeed, I only returned from it last weekend. Well, let us look at Japanese policy. Japan has a very large budget deficit indeed. Japan has a marginal rate of personal taxation among the highest, perhaps the highest, in the developed world. I'm not saying that we should imitate her in those two respects. But what I am saying is that these two factors do not seem to have militated against a remarkable economic progress, with unemployment and inflation hardly in existence. Now, this is no doubt, at least partly due to Japan's highly successful employment and incomes policy. And whatever this may be the place for those policies in this country, they've certainly enabled her also to achieve a very remarkable improvement in her standard of living. And incidentally, this is an aspect which, alas, we cannot be very proud of when we read in the latest OECD report that in that respect, among the countries in the developed world, we stand in the 13th place. It can also be argued, and has been very cogently argued, by a distinguished Japanese economist, that one of the most important, perhaps the single most important factor in Japan's success has been, from the very earliest post-war days, a very carefully managed exchange rate policy. And this brings me to my final point, the role of sterling and the European monetary system. There may have been at least plausible arguments in the earlier stages for our hesitation in becoming full members. I myself, I confess, have never been fully convinced. Indeed, I've always thought that resistance was primarily due to a deep-seated prejudice against the whole European venture and from a sort of residual fear that we might lose yet another important aspect of economic sovereignty. I must confess I haven't seen much evidence of sovereignty in the recent development of the sterling exchange rate. At any rate, we have come a long way since. There was evidence already 4.5 years ago that the system was stable and that it had conferred benefits on its members. And that evidence has accumulated considerably since. Your Lordship's House debated this matter a little over a year ago on the basis of a report from the Select Committee on the European Community. That report was prepared by a most distinguished group, chaired by my noble friend, Lord O'Brien of Lothbury. If you'll allow me to say so, a guarantee that profound expert knowledge would be applied to this problem with thoroughness and objectivity. That report came to a generally favorable conclusion on our membership. And when it was debated here, many, if not most lords, spoke in the same sense. Yet the government, I'm afraid, has done nothing. We are now told, the noble Earl, the Elgari, in a recent answer to a question, and again today, said the reason is that sterling is now a petrocurrency. Quite frankly, I have no idea what that is meant to be. I suppose at one time one could have called us a Scotch whisky currency, or one might have called the French franc a champagne and perfume currency, or the D-mark a Mercedes and machine tool currency, and so on. If by this is meant that the price of oil, or the expected price of oil, has the main influence on the rate of sterling, I claim that that is at best a gross oversimplification. And surely the high appreciation of sterling in 79 and 80 was much more due to the high rates of interest prevailing in this country, which produced an influx of money in search of high yields, than anything else. At any rate, no one has yet demonstrated convincingly why the influence of the price of oil on sterling argues against rather than for membership of the MS. No, my lords, when the noble Earl, the Elgari, speaks on this matter, what I hear is St. Augustine praying to the Lord to give him chastity and continence. But not yet. Well, my lords, I think it's high time St. Augustine's prayer was answered. My lords, I do not say that the government should replace one set of doctrines by another. By no means. What I am saying is that exchange rate policy, interest rate policy, the precise balance between taxation and expenditure on public capital investment, and all the other paraphernalia of economic policy, including attitude to and methods of wage settlement, are not matters suitable to be elevated to points of dogma. The countries which are held up to us as examples of successful economic policy pursue all sorts of different mixtures of policy, and none of them at all like ours. So I'm afraid what is extolled as the only practical expression of economic wisdom is hardly to be found anywhere else. I must say I do beg the noble Earl, the Minister, and the noble Viscount, the Leader of the House, to urge upon their colleagues not to be bound by self-imposed doctrinal shackles, which in my view are quite wrongly equated with high principle, but to pursue policies which are appropriate to the circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Eric